Hey everyone, my name is Kretz and today we are doing a review of the Freewell filters pack. It's a magnetic set which must be very convenient, comfortable and very versatile considering what's inside the package. So we're going to be doing a really thorough review and see for its build quality and a lot of tests for its image quality. But before getting into any more details, let's see what's inside the package and do the unboxing. So here we are, this is our package. It's nicely packed, really quality packed with brand duct tape around it. And it just safely packed, and it was quite fastly delivered to me. I didn't have to wait for long. And what's inside it is a very beautiful white brand box wrapped in cellophane. So it's a really high quality cover here. And when we open this up, let's see what's inside it. The box is really beautiful and it's a high quality carton, and inside it we see a square envelope which contains a piece of cloth for cleaning your lenses and filters, some stickers and instruction manual which I'll describe later. And here's our pouch, which is actually a kind of a hard case. It's quite hard and tough. It's got a nice loop for clamping your pouch to, say, backpack or a belt or a strap. When you open this up, there are our filters, each one in its own separate section or a pocket, and very little pockets for probably SD cards. And now when we grab out one piece of it, this is actually the mount itself. The mount which contains the ND base inside and the lens cap on top of it. So you don't have to use your regular plastic lens cap from your lens, which is very convenient because now you have your brand magnetic cap for the filters on top of it, and it's very convenient. You don't have to switch anything. And now there's a little piece which you pull, and then it all unfolds. All these sections unfold, and each filter is quite easy to reach. And now let's reach the first one, which is 2 to 5 stops ND filter on one side. And if you turn it around, then you'll reach the CPL, which is circular polarizer filter. This is a really high quality product, and you can feel it in your hands. It's a very high quality metal, and the glass is beautiful, polished, top quality, I would say, and you really feel it in your hands. Not only the filters, but the pouch, the package, this case, I mean. It's all really top quality materials. The second filter here is 6 to 9 stops ND on one side, and 32 ND and circular polarizer on the other side. So this is a darker filter than the previous one, but of course it's also the top quality product. So it's beautiful, it looks beautiful, and it performs well, which I'll show you just a little bit later. Then let's go further. These filters are a little bit harder to bring back than to pull out, but you have to get used to it. It's no problem, basically. And the last thing here is the mist ND base. So there's ND base in the mount already, looking probably the same like this, but this is for the mist VND filter base, which is put to the mount. So here's our hard case. And it's very easy and comfortable and convenient to use. So nice, comfortable pouch or hard case for your filters, always by your side and easy to reach. Now let's get back for a second for what's left in the box, and this is a carabine for clamping. So you have the instrument for clamping your hard case to whatever you want. There's a little piece of foam for protection, and let's get back for a second to the manual, which is called the filter guide. And it actually contains the description of all the filters that are in your pack already, but it has also a description of every other filter that the company produces, so you can get the information about that. But I must say, this manual actually contains some spelling mistakes in English. That's a minor flaw, but you know, they have to be a little bit more accurate with that. And it's a card with video tutorials and a QR code which leads to those lessons. The first thing I want to point out right away is that this is basically a sponsored review, but in a way that the Freewell company sent me these filters for free. So I'm really grateful for that, but they did not tell me a single word to say about their product. And I've communicated with the employee of the company, discussing delivery and some other questions, and they were very, very polite. So this service is just 5 stars. It was a pleasure to communicate with the company. So anyway, but I do not owe anyone anything, and I'll tell you everything about these filters that I think personally, anything positive and anything negative, straight truth. Now when we know what's inside the package, let's start with the size, with the form factor. And I actually used ND filters previously. I used cheap Chinese filter, and I'll show you the comparison of image quality between these Freewell filters and my old cheap filter later. But now I just want to show you the difference in size. Well, here's that filter that I've used for several years. You see, there it is. It's a Fotga filter. It's a nice filter for its price. It has some flaws, but you see, it's small, slim, and it turns. It doesn't have hard stops, so you do not know when to start, when to finish, and it doesn't have clicks. So these are peculiarities, but this is the size. You see, it's quite slim, and it is not basically much wider than the lens itself. Now let's see how the Freewell filter looks. Let me just change and switch the filters. So here's the filter by Freewell. Let's get the focus. Let's get everything in focus. Alright, so it's much wider than the previous filter, and it's really wider than the lens itself, as you see. And this is just the lens cap. If we take it away, well, there's the filter, and there's the base filter inside of it. If we take it out, this is just the mount, the screwed mount, wide really, and there's the base filter. So say mist filter or ND, and then on top of it we mount the magnetic filter itself. So now here's how it looks really. So it's quite bigger than the lens itself, quite wider, but very, very comfortable to use it with magnetic filter and magnetic cap, lens cap. You don't have to use your original lens cap, as I've told you previously. So this is a really, really comfortable and easy and fast to switch lens filters. But what's the cork for this? By the way, this is how it looks with the filter and with the lens cap on. So quite a little bit bigger than the lens itself. Now the problem may appear when you want to use the lens hood, and I'll show you in the B-roll how it looks, because I'm shooting this on a separate day. You cannot, of course, use the lens hood on top of the filters, as I've showed you. The filter is quite wide, and you will not be able to mount your lens hood on top of the filter system itself when it's mounted. Of course, it may differ and it may depend on different lenses. Some lenses may allow that, some, very wide maybe lens hoods can fit the thing, but in a regular application and in the case of the lens that I'm showing to you on the B-roll, it is not so, and it's just impossible to mount the blend on top of the filter. But if you mount the lens hood first, then there's a place for the filter, and the base of the filter, the mount itself, is actually able to fit inside the lens hood and to be screwed onto the lens. So I'm showing you how it looks, but it's not very convenient because you have to screw it with your fingers. There is not a tool that can help you, so it's quite a bit inconvenient, and maybe in some cases with some lenses, some lens hoods, it may be impossible, but in this case it is possible really. And of course it's quite easy to fit the base filter inside, because the base filter, it is a smaller one, so it actually easily fits inside that mount. But the problem may appear when you try to fit the filter itself on top of the mount, on top of the base filter, and it all is happening inside the lens hood. And I'll tell you right away, I did not dare to do that, because I figured out that the magnet is actually really strong in this system, which is good in practical application. But when it's happening inside the lens hood, I was just afraid that I would not be able to pull the filter out back, because there's no room for your fingers, you know, or your nails to somehow scratch it out from there. And you would probably have to use some pin, or, you know, maybe a flat screwdriver or something. And I didn't want to go into that situation, so I did not magnet my filter inside of it. So the conclusion is that you can, in most cases, I believe you can screw the base inside of the lens hood, and you can easily mount the base filter. But there may be a problem with getting it all the system out from there, because if the magnet is too strong for you to pull it out, then you will not be able as well to get off the lens hood, because it is pressed upon with the screwed mount. So it's just, you know, the situation without exit. It may end up with that, and I did not risk that, so it's up to you whether to try use this filter system on top of the lens hood or not, or just to try to find some other lens hoods that could fit somehow onto this filter system. Let's see for the other ergonomics of the filter. It has hard stops, which is in some cases, in most cases, very convenient. So you can turn the filter and it has stops. In case of ND filters, of course, because CPL filters, circular polarizing filters, do not have hard stops because you don't need it, and you may use it for different effects. But here, hard stops are really cool. You never miss the point, the lowest setting and the biggest setting, but what's in the middle, it doesn't have clicks. Maybe in some cases it's preferable to have clicks, especially for testing, for, you know, for reviewers like me. It would be preferable to have an option to have clicks, you know, to just get the exact stops of light that you are cutting off. But in practical application, you may need a very tiny change of the value, and in this case you of course don't need to have the hard clicks. So it's a great system, and the hard stops are really useful, unlike my other chip filter which didn't have it, and you had to precisely turn it for the desired effect. The hard stops are great. So now when we've done with the ergonomics, and if I missed something, just leave a comment down below and correct me or add something to it. Now when we've done with it, let's dive deep into the tests and see how these filters really work in different scenarios and for different purposes. Let's go. Alright, here we are at the central park of my town, and we're shooting in a nice sunny, bright, shiny day. As you see, it's a really nice day to shoot, and you see the picture is good. The picture is sharp, it's vivid, it's bright, and it's properly exposed, and it's okay. But it's not interesting, it's not particularly artistic, because you see all that perspective behind my back, and you see it all. Let me just, you know, go away from the camera so you see this all. And why do you see it? Because the depth of field is not shallow. You see everything in focus, the background, the middle ground, you know, the foreground, everything. Why is that? That is because to fight that huge amount of light, the camera had to change the settings. Right now I'm shooting in the automatic settings, and let me see on my screen. The camera of course chosen the lowest ISO possible, which is 100. But in order to fight such huge amount of light, it had to clamp down the aperture to f11, you know. That's a really dark aperture. And the shutter speed to 1/200th of a second. So it made the image really dark under, you know, normal or indoor conditions. But in the bright sunlight, in order to get standard exposure, it really had to clamp everything down, and it does not deliver the beautiful picture. You know, this picture like this we can actually achieve with almost any mobile device these days. With any mobile camera, with the smartphone, we can achieve, you know, the same picture, bright, nice, sharp and stuff. But what we do really need nice big cameras with huge sensors, comparing to mobile sensors, and big lenses with wide aperture. we can achieve the shallow depth of field, so that some parts of your pictures are blurred out and some are in focus, some out of focus, which actually creates the 3D, three-dimensional image, which we cannot see right now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna switch from automatic to manual mode and see what's going on about the light and why we need the filters. Let me switch the mode. Now I've switched the mode and I've set manually the settings, the ISO to 100, it's okay. And now you see the background is quite blurred, right? Because the aperture here is at 3.5. It's the 10mm lens, and it's an ultra-wide angle lens on my cropped sensor Canon 80D camera, so 1.6 times crop from the full frame sensor. And it's, yeah, we got the nice and blurred background. Not particularly blurred because it's only 3.5, and just imagine what you could get with 1.8, 1.2 or even faster lenses. I'll show you the examples later, but this lens is just convenient to shoot the talking stuff. But in order to get the standard exposure, I had to set the shutter speed to 1/2000th of a second. That's a huge number, and in order to get a really nice cinematic look. So let's start with what we get with the higher shutter speed, higher number of shutter speed. We get the choppy look. See how my motion is not blurred? You see, that's the choppy image. So if that's what you're going for, say like the dissenting the troops on the beaches of Normandy in the Saving Private Ryan look, then that's okay, go for it. Or if you just forgot your filters at home, really you should clamp down. You should leave the aperture wide open and clamp the shutter down. That's all right. But if you have filters, you're gonna do another thing, and that's what? We're gonna set the shutter speed twice the frame rate. That creates the real cinematic look. And we are now shooting at 25 frames per second, which is standard frame rate in my country, which is PAL country, PAL. So the frequency in our light sockets is 50 Hz, so the standard frame rate is twice lower, 25 frames per second. So I have to set the shutter speed at 1/50th. And let's see what's going on if I'm setting 1/50th of a second right now. You see, it is all absolutely blown out, so I cannot set the desired shutter speed, the desired lowest ISO for cleanest image, and the desired widest opened aperture. So now I'll clamp down for a second the shutter speed. Now I'm gonna bring the filters out and show you how they work in this particular situation. What's particularly convenient about this set of filters is its package. I can actually clamp it to the zipper of my jacket, what I did right here. So I'm opening the package, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab the base of the filter, which is 77mm. I'll just pull this lever and grab it out. So there it is. I'm gonna kind of like unhitch the magnetic cap of the filter. I don't need it. And here's the base, the mount, and the variable ND filter base. So now I'm gonna screw it in real time. Screw the base of the filter to the lens. I hope I can do that. Alright, but it's just the base. Everything else is on the magnets here, which is so convenient. Now let me see. There's the variable ND base, because the VND actually consists of two parts, the base and the filter itself. So what I'm gonna do right now is just stick the filter inside, and it's already, as you see, it already cuts the light down by one whole stop. So from the shutter speed of 2000, I can now bring it to 1000. So it's already one stop lower. But that's not enough, and I need really to get further. So I'm taking the filter out from the box. This is 2 to 5 stop filter, and I need to place it the correct way, because what's the most amazing about these filters is that they are actually two-sided. There's the CPL from one side and 2 to 5 stop ND from the other side, you see. So basically right now I need 2 to 5 stop VND, so let me put it the correct way. There are some hints about that. Alright, so now what we got here, let's see for the metering. We got one full stop and 1/3 of a stop, so now I'm at 800th of a second, and I want to just, you know, 1/50th, so I'm turning the shutter speed to get 1/50th, right? And it's really still bright. Now I'm gonna turn the filter right on the lens to the full 5 stops. You see how the picture changed, and that's actually not enough. Under middle bright conditions, that might be enough, 2 to 5 stops, right? But now I see it's still a bit blurred out. As my metering says, it's just by 1 stop too much. And this is with the 3.5 aperture. And imagine if we really had 1.8, that would be not near enough, really. So we're gonna unmagnet this 2 to 5 point stop filter. It's gonna be blown out totally. I'll take it out, and we're gonna grab the 6 to 9 stop filter, which is two-sided as well, and I'll just clamp it onto the lens again, and now we get 6 full stops straight away. So this looks like okay. It's even, yeah, right. This is right in the middle. The metering tells me that at 1/50th of a second and at 3.5 aperture at ISO 100, this is the correct exposure. So we need really to clamp down 6 stops of light to get the correct exposure at 10 millimeters at crop sensor cameras at f3.5. That's a huge amount, and we cannot do it without the filter, really. But just imagine we have the faster lens. Let's say we have, I said the ISO, you know, twice the amount at ISO 400, you know, to imitate that we have 4 times faster lens. And now I can turn the filter even more, and it's gonna darken the image, and we'll get the correct exposure, the you know, the exposure we need. All right, so I'm right now at about around 8 stops of the exposure, and some artifacts may present like vignetting and stuff, and it all depends on the angle of view, because with the 10 millimeters angle of view on crop sensor camera, it's really wide angle. We can zoom it in a little bit, and maybe some vignetting goes away, and it all depends. So you have to set the filter the way you need, but these filters actually work. And what's also really interesting, now let me set the ISO to the appropriate amount, or just even get it automatic. We can set the ISO to automatic, and shutter speed to 1/50th and aperture to 3.5, and with the 6 stops of light cut with the help of the filters, this is the properly exposed picture. What's also very interesting is if it affects the picture quality, the sharpness, the colors and stuff, the color tint, except for the vignetting and stuff. And I've previously used some very cheap ND filter. I've used it for a few years now. It's the Fotga filter. It's really cheap. I bought it from a Chinese online store. And let's compare. This is the picture, how it looks with the filter, with the Freewell filter. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take off the filter, right? But and just unscrew the filter altogether, if I can do it correctly and accurately. And of course the picture is totally blown out, and I'll just screw my old filter. I'll try to screw. It's just screw-on filter. It's not very convenient. It doesn't have hard stops. I can't even see where it starts. It's the minimum, and that's the let me see. That's the maximum setting. Maximum, right? There's a cross polarization appearing. You see the dark cross. That's the bad sign. So we have to pull it back a little bit. And so it's maximum. This is the maximum that the filter gives, and it's almost enough. It's 1/3 of exposure overexposed, as my metering shows me. So that's the limit of my old filter. So first of all, the Freewell filter 6 to 9 stops gives me much more opportunity to get more light and cut more light if I need it, while this old cheap filter, it doesn't have hard stops, so it's hard to get the exact numbers, and it does not have the exact numbers written down on the filter. So it works right, but as I'm telling you this, I'll just show you the free pictures on the screen concerning the color of this particular old, very cheap Chinese filter, and the color of the Freewell filter, and the color without filter. So you can make your own mind, but of course I need to set the white balance properly in order to compare them all. So the white balance in all of those pictures is set to the daylight, so you can see the real difference between the three filters. So here's the Fotga filter with the most light cut down as it's possible on the filter, and in 1/50th of a second with 3.5 aperture at ISO 100 and daylight white balance. You see how the color looks. Here we are with the Freewell filter 6 to 9 ND stops at 6 stops cut light, and with the absolutely same settings you see how the picture looks concerning the sharpness, vignetting, overall picture quality, and especially the color tint. And now we are at the automatic mode, so the color of the lens itself with the aperture of f11, the shutter speed of 160th of a second and ISO 100, and the same daylight white balance. So we now can compare the three of them all together. So now I'm on behind the camera, and what I've also been really interested in is how the lens and the filters actually perform on the longer focal length. Previously we've seen it at a really wide angle at 10 millimeters, and now I've put my super zoom lens 18 to 200. It's not the best lens in the world, but by itself it's really quite sharp, and among the zoom lens it's really superior. And it's the Canon lens 18 to 200. You see it at 18 millimeters without any filters, and again it's 1/200th of a second and f11 aperture and ISO 100. And if I just zoom it in from the tripod to the full 200 millimeters, you see its sharpness. There's a 200 millimeters on the crop sensor camera. You see it's really nice and sharp picture. It's quite alright for the video. We'll look at the photo results later, but for the video it's okay. And it's 200 millimeters and now 18 millimeters. Now let's check it out with different filters. Now I've screwed my old Fotga filter, very cheap Chinese filter, and now we are in manual mode, so we have the aperture of 3.5 on this particular lens at the wide angle, and the aperture is gonna close down because it's the variable aperture lens, and this is ISO is automatic in order to counteract the variable aperture, and the shutter speed is 1/50th of a second. So now let's zoom in, and the aperture is gonna close down to 5.6 here at 200 millimeters, and the filter, my Fotga old cheap filter, is set to the maximum setting, and so at 5.6 and ISO of 160, this cuts down the 5 stops of light, and you can see if it's sharp or not, because previously I've noticed that the filters on the longer focal lengths can blur the image and it's not particularly sharp, but now you can see it for yourself if it's sharp or not at 200 millimeters with cheap Chinese filter. And now we're back to 18 millimeters. And finally, here we are with the Freewell filter, 6 to 9 stops at 6 stops ND filter. The same settings, aperture 3.5 at the wide angle, 1/50th of a second, 125 ISO. And we now zoom in all the way to 200 millimeters and see if the sharpness changes at the aperture of 5.6 with 6 stops of light cut down with the filter. And so The ISO is 250 and the shutter speed is the same 1/50. So you see if the sharpness degrades with the filter or not. And now I'll show you all three in one screen so that you can compare it a bit closer. Now here's another application for using ND filters. As you've already known, it just cuts down the light. Where else can we need that? Like in this example, here's a nice spring forest stream flowing. And you see the motion is quite fast, so the water is streaming. And if we do a conventional picture like this that I'm showing you on the screen, it's okay, the water is frozen and we see everything and all the details and stuff. But if we slow the shutter speed down severely, then we can smooth the water out and get the picture like this, as you see. But by slowing the shutter speed down, we increase the amount of light that gets inside the lens. So that's where we need to cut the light off with the filter. So if we have a fast lens, in this particular example, it's not the fastest lens in the world, it's only 2.8, but it's quite fast for bright daylight. And so the cut off light of 9 stops in this example gives quite nice smoothing of the stream. So that's another application for great ND filters. And here's one more way to use the ND filters for long exposure photography. As you see, there is a lot of people always walking by and cars driving by and stuff, but if you want to get rid of them in the scene, you really need a very, very long shutter speed so that they are so blurred in motion that they just vanish. And in the next example that I'm showing you on the screen, I've just stacked 2 filters, one right on the top of another. So I've set the 6 to 9 stops to 9 stops and just put another filter on top of it with the 5 stops more light cut out. And so it's a total amount of, who knows, a lot of light. And you see the picture and no one's in the frame. And as you see in this real-time video footage, there's not a single moment that there are no people or cars in the scene. So the photograph that I'm showing you is really the long exposure, and I'm showing you the settings on the screen. It's really long exposure photography to get rid of all the moving subjects like cars and people in the frame. So it's not a miracle, and I haven't erased them. It's not a Photoshop, it's just long exposure photography in the daylight with cutting off light with a lot of ND filters and a lot of ND filtering. So now let's figure out what the circular polarizing filter is for. One of the applications is to get rid of the reflections. As you here see, there's a nice puddle with the reflection of the tree in it and the sky. And now I just screwed on the circular polarizer, which is the same as 2 to 5 stops ND filter. I've just switched the side which I mounted on the mount on the lens. And now if I turn the circular polarizer, you will see that the reflection is going away. That's a miracle, you must say. But what you can also see is that the tint of the picture changes. You know, see from warm, from blue, from cold to warm. And what's the thing? And it's the one important point, you don't have to use the VND base in it. So when we used it for ND filter, we used the base that was magneted inside the mount, and then on top of it we've put the filter, 2 to 5 point stops. But now I'll take away the 2 to 5 point stops and take away the VND base here. So you see there's the filter and here's the base. And when I take out the base and leave just the filter, now it's like this, right? Now the color is gonna be the true color because VND base actually changes the tint. And now if I turn the filter, we can get rid of the reflection, but the color will stay the same. So do not use the base when you use the CPL. And now when you turn to certain angle, you see that the reflection is gone and it's quite transparent. Not 100%, but it also depends on the angle that you shoot to the sun and angle to the subject. But in this particular case, it is obvious that the circular polarizing filter, if I turn and turn and turn it, it can get rid of the most of the reflections. And sometimes it can get rid of all the reflections, like I'm showing you in these two photos. So now we are doing it during shooting video, but of course you can do it on photos too. Let's take another look at these test pictures, and here we are at the Lightroom. And here's why. Previously I've showed you the video from the camera and the on-camera JPEG, so all the test shots were just JPEG straight from the camera with the baked-in settings, and they were shot with the automatic white balance. So if the filters actually change the color or tint, then the automatic white balance would correct that, so we would not see the true color and how it changes. And now here in the Lightroom we can definitely see that because we've got the temperature control and the tint control. So let's take a closer look. Here are the same pictures with the polarizing filter and the ND filters and the stacked ND filters. So now let's go here. Here's the photo with the my old Fotga filter. What we see in close-up is the same. It's lost its sharpness at 200 millimeters, and here we see the original file, which is absolutely brilliantly sharp, even with this cheap lens at 200 millimeters. What I've showed you previously, it's okay, and with the Freewell filter, it's really sharp. It's not as sharp as without filters, but it's definitely absolutely usable, and it's great. It's okay. It's nowhere near the bad cheap Chinese Fotga filter. But now let's see for the color. You've already probably seen that the color changed, and here I haven't touched anything yet, and with all these files I've just left the default sharpness here, and no noise reduction and no lens corrections. It doesn't matter in our case, so we don't do that, and everything else is basically the default settings. So now the baked-in automatic white balance you see here, it's 4250 with the filter and 4200 with the second filter, but without filter we see it's 4800, so it's much warmer. So we can say that the filter actually warms the color, must be, or cooling the color, and it changes the tint. So you see the number here to the magenta side a little bit with both of the filters, and with the original picture without the filter the tint is a little bit different. But what happens if we just set the same numbers here? Let's see, for the original it's 4900, so it's really close to 5000. So let's make them all 5000 kelvins and zero tint, just for the sake of it, to see the neutral picture on all three. And so here's the original, quite warm, really, it's a daylight. Now we see, and let's go for the Fotga filter. We see it's warmer and greener, and quite the same. Basically, looks like absolutely the same with the Freewell filter. If we just switch to the same temperature, now let's see for the reference. Here's the original without a filter, and here's a little yellowish greenish tint from one filter and from the other filter. So we definitely see that the tint changes, but basically not in a bad way. First of all, if this is a picture, or if this is a raw video, I mean raw photo or raw video, you can really change the color in post
to certain degree, but if it's a raw file, then you can change it all the way down or up. But all the same, it looks like more cinematic than the original, actually. You see, it's a little bit on magenta and the blue side, and this is warmer and greener and yellower. And this is actually, to my eye, is a little bit more pleasing, actually. Well, but anyway, we definitely see the change in color. And let's go for other shots. Here's the shot with the flowing stream. This is without a filter. So here's how it looks, and it's 5750 kelvins. And here with the ND filter at 1 second of shutter speed, we have 5350 kelvins. Right, so we already see the same, probably the same amount of coolness or warmness in the pictures. And here's the same shot with 8 seconds of shutter speed, and we see it's a little bit on the brighter side, probably around 1/3 of a stop mistake in the exposure, right? Yeah, so we see this is the correct exposure and quite the same temperature, but without the filter it's definitely warmer temperature. So again, let's make it say 5600, the classic daylight temperature, and see for all three pictures if they change. And of course we're gonna be setting the tint to 0. And see, here's the original without filter, nicely looking natural colors. Then we go for the filter with 1 second of shutter speed. And again, it's warmer and it's greener and yellower. And the same with the even more shutter speed. So now let's go to the reference state and see. Right, he's 1/400th of a second original, and he's a warmer picture with filter, so it definitely changes the tint, and I'm not sure it's good or really bad, but that's just the fact, and you have to work around it. So we can actually move the slider here and make it a little, you know, cooler and a little to the magenta side, so we can correct that so it looks, you know, quite the same as the original, right? So we can change that, especially with the raw files. But for the originals, you can be sure that the tint and the temperature definitely changes. And of course, the automatic white balance could probably easily switch that too and correct that. Now another couple of pictures, and now it's not with ND, it's with the polarizing filter, but the polarizing filter also has ND effect, so it's only 1/15th of a second. And here's two states of the filter. Without polarization, you see the reflections, and here's without the reflections. Very, very nice picture. The transparent water, it's just beautiful. You see the nice spring melting snow and spring stream. But what's with the temperature again? We have 5350 in the polarization state and 5300, the same temperature, but let's just make them absolutely the same, 0 tint, and say 5600 kelvins. We're just looking here for if the color and tint changes while we're changing polarization. I am not sure. Let's go to the reference mode and see. Looks like the tint and the color actually slightly changes. You see, in the polarization state, to my eye, this looks a bit, again, a bit warmer and a bit yellower than the original without the polarization. And a couple more pictures, just, you know, the same, without the polarization and with polarization. And let's bring them all again to the same 5600 kelvins and 0 tint. And again, when there's a polarization, we see a little bit warmer picture. So, but the change is, to my eyes, not as drastic as with the ND filters. but the color definitely changes, and be aware of that. And now the last tests with the super long shutter speeds. This is the original file with ND filter already, but it's only 1/200th of a second. You see the settings here, I believe, on the screen. So that's the original normal picture, right? Okay, nothing interesting here. But then we go for the second picture with the probably the correct exposure for this composition, with the ISO 100 and 1/640th of a second. So this is a normal picture with people and cars and stuff. But then we go for the long exposure and see that the color don't change, and it's 10 seconds of exposure at f/18. But 10 seconds seems not enough to eliminate all the people. You see here there are ghosts walking across the street, and the cars at 10 seconds, they are waiting for the people. So not eliminated, but the colors are the same. Now the 8 seconds, again, do not eliminate people, but now we go for really long shutter speed at 25 seconds. And here we see just only one person here standing waiting on to cross the road, but everything else is gone. Probably there are people sitting, they're not going anywhere. But finally what we see here, 30 seconds. Everything is gone. All the cars and people that were actually walking here, they are gone. And the colors does not seem to change really. There's a slightly change in exposure. I believe we gotta bring the exposure up by 1/3, right? And probably bring here the exposure down by 1/3. This is just, you know, minor mistakes that I made or the camera made during metering, but now they look quite the same. So, but let's see, put your eyes here. 4900 kelvins, 5150 kelvins, you see 5000 kelvins, 5000 again, 3850. That's a drastic change really, and 3850 again. And what's the difference here between this and this shot? Is the shutter speed, 8 seconds and 25 seconds. So again, let's make it the daylight setting of 5600 kelvins and 0 tint. Yes, even the original looks maybe not so natural, a little bit green. But here the picture with the most natural exposure looks okay. But let's go further and see. With the same temperatures, 10 seconds looks a little bit greener and warmer than 8 seconds, the same. But the most drastic change we see at the 25 seconds. You see how much warmer is this picture. And the sound actually did not change during the shooting, because these all were made within 5 minutes probably. And again, at 30 seconds, it's really, really warm, and the color actually seriously changed. So let's see the original and the 25 seconds. You see all the settings. This is the difference when we put the same temperature. Again, we can bring it down. We can bring the slider up here, down here, and change it or make it even automatic. Alright, I just set the automatic, and you see there's no much difference. So you can change it if you're dealing with photos and in RAW format. But be aware that the color and the tint drastically changes with the long exposure, at least at my tests. That's what I found out. So that's just, I wanted to get a little bit more into details in these regards.
One point about the ND filters in particular is that, as we've seen in these video tests previously, the real amount of light that you want to cut off on a bright, shiny, sunny day is around 6 stops. But say if the cloud flies by, and it's less light, then you will have to go to 5 stops. But in this particular case, 5 stops is a different filter. One is from 2 to 5, another is from 6 to 9. So if you go to shadow, there's a cloud flying by, it might be necessary to switch the filters. And in this case, it might be much more ergonomical, more convenient to have an ND filter, say, from 4.5 stops to 7.5 stops. Right there, that's mostly what you need on a sunny day, but of course they would be not so versatile as 2.5 and 6.9, and you would not be able to get to the extremes, both sides. So in broad daylight, there may be a situation when you have to switch the filters between 5 stops and 6 stops, because these are different filters. But that's the way we do it, and that's the way the company decided to do their filters. And of course, I mean shooting video with the standard frame rate and standard shutter speed. It's just about the classic cinematic videos, because if you're shooting, you say, photos with the ND filters, of course you can play with the shutter speed much more than the turning the ND filters. So it's less of a problem with photo. It only concerns the video.
I'm out in the street again, and I can barely see myself on the screen of this camera because it's a very, very bright sunset. But the sunset is quite nice time to check out the last filter of the set, which is Mist VND filter. And it's basically not a filter by itself, it's just the base under the filter. So you can use it on its own, just the Mist base, or you can use it like I'm doing right now, which is a Mist VND base at the bottom and 6 to 9 stops VND on top of it. So we are now at 6 stops VND at 1/50th of a second, 3.5 aperture and ISO 200. And I don't think you see any much difference with this Mist filter, but what it's supposed to do is actually softening the highlights, flattening the dynamic range, and basically lowering the contrast a little bit and creating a halo or a glowing effect around the bright points of light. So now we're gonna try and turn around to get into the direct sunlight. So you see the sun is right behind me. Let me see if this is, you know, darkening or glowing or something. Let's try and change the exposure and bring up the ISO from 200 to something where you could see my face. So we're blowing out the sky behind me, but at the same time we could see the glow. It seems like the glowing effect of the sun right behind my head. Now let's check it out without the Mist base, just with the regular VND base. So here's absolutely the same settings, but with the regular VND base inside of it instead of the Mist base. And I'm trying to show you the glaring sunlight, and of course I'll be showing you the both footages on one screen, but here's how it looks like. And is there any halo or mystic look or something like that? Alright, let's turn around and switch the ISO to automatic. Oh, let me see, it is so bright outside. Okay, so that's the Mist base, and we're also gonna be checking it out in the night with the artificial bright points of light as well. Let's do this. This is basically the same place, but later in the night you see it's dark around, and I had to go to 3200 ISO. This is a really high ISO for this type of camera, which is APS-C camera, and I had to drop down the shutter speed to 1/25th, so to at least have one stop of light more. So the motion may be blurred, but we don't care about that when testing filters, because we're gonna be testing it for the glowing effect and for the changing of picture quality using the Mist filter. So now let's again turn around and find the bright light. Here you see it behind my head. So here we are shooting without any filters at all. This is a clear picture, but I have the mount screwed on my lens. So no filters, you see that point of light. Now I'm taking the Mist base, just the Mist base, no NDs, and I just put it on. This is just the ND base, and you see the glowing actually expanded a little bit, and the color tint changes as I see on this screen, but the halo actually appeared And of course the you see the steam from my mouth, because it's quite cold out here, actually creates even more effect. So now let's put off this filter again and have some steam. You see that point of light actually has different shape than with the filter. So the mist filter actually works, although it actually reduces the light and changes the color tint. But it definitely creates some nice cinematic glowing effect.
So what are the conclusions about this product? You know, the conclusions are easy. This is a very, very great package, and it's of very high quality. It's the top quality for quite moderate price. For this high level of quality, this is really a moderate price, I would say. Of course, there are filters that are more expensive, there are filters that are cheaper, and of course there's different quirks to it, to any brand, you know, to any model, but these filters are really great in ergonomics, in build quality, and of course you've seen it for yourself. They are absolutely fantastic in picture quality. So I'm really happy for the Freewell company to put out such a nice product, and I'm really grateful for them, to them for sending me these for a review. Now, it was Paul Kretz. Leave comments down below if you used these filters or any other filters and there's anything you can add to this review. And of course, don't miss the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, and I'll probably see you in the next video. But in the meanwhile, just go watch some of my other videos. There are pretty many of them already on the channel, so bye.